Document my brother slid across the kitchen table still had the notary seal on it, ink barely dry, and he was already on his phone texting someone while his wife refilled her coffee like they were waiting for a movie to start. I remember thinking, they look like people who have already seen the ending. My mother had been gone for 11 days. I should back up, because the table scene doesn't make sense without the 22 months that came before it. My mother was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's in the spring of my 28th year, which is a sentence I have never been able to say out loud without my voice doing something embarrassing. She was 61. She had just retired from 27 years as a middle school librarian in Tucson, Arizona, and she had plans: a road trip to the Pacific Coast Highway she'd been postponing for a decade, a watercolor class at the community center on Thursdays, a garden she was finally going to plant correctly. The diagnosis didn't erase the plans immediately, but it changed the timeline in a way that made every postponement feel like a small betrayal. I am a licensed home health aide and a certified nursing assistant. I have been doing this work since I was 23, which means I understand medication schedules and fall prevention and the specific bureaucratic suffering of fighting insurance companies for equipment that a patient genuinely needs. I know how to read a care plan. I know what it looks like when someone is declining and what it looks like when someone is having a bad week. I know the difference between a family that is present and a family that performs presence. My brother Vic is 4 years older than me. He married his wife Tara 8 years ago in a ceremony in Sedona that my mother paid for in part because Vic had a cash flow situation that year. He works in commercial real estate, which means his income comes in large and unpredictable waves. He drives a truck that costs more than my annual salary. He calls himself an entrepreneur in social media bios, which I have never commented on. When my mother's symptoms began progressing past what she could manage alone, I moved in with her. This was not a discussion or a negotiation. I had a lease ending, she had a 3-bedroom house in the Rincon Valley neighborhood, and the math was simple. I gave up my apartment, my routine, my Tuesday evenings at a pottery class I had been doing for 3 years, and I moved into the guest room that still had my 8th grade track ribbons on the wall. Vic lived 40 minutes away. In 22 months, he visited 11 times. I know this because I kept a log, not because I was planning anything. I kept it the same way I keep medication logs and appointment records, because I am constitutionally incapable of not documenting things. My mother's occupational therapist once told me I had the most organized care binder she had ever seen in a private home setting. I took it as a compliment. I still do. During those 22 months, Tara visited 7 times. On 4 of those occasions, she sat on the living room couch and told my mother that she looked wonderful, which my mother did not, and talked about their upcoming kitchen renovation, and left within 90 minutes. She brought flowers twice, grocery store flowers, the kind in the plastic sleeve. My mother kept them on the counter until they turned, and then I threw them away. Bitch's financial contribution to my mother's care was exactly one Venmo transfer of $300 in the first month, tagged for groceries. After that, nothing. The occupational therapy co-pays, the grab bars I had installed in both bathrooms, the specialized mattress, the prescription supplements her neurologist recommended and insurance wouldn't touch. All of it came from my mother's fixed income and my own checking account. I did not ask Vic to contribute because I assumed he would see the situation and respond to it. This was a significant miscalculation. My mother passed on a Thursday morning in March. She was in her own bedroom and her own bed, with her favorite quilt from her mother's house pulled up to her chin. I had spent the previous 4 days barely sleeping. The hospice nurse arrived within the hour. I called Vic from the hallway and he said he would be there as soon as he could, which turned out to mean 4 hours later, by which time the hospice team had already completed their initial visit and my mother's body had already been transferred. He arrived with Tara and a paper bag from a bakery. He hugged me for a long time, which I appreciated. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and asked if I had thought about what I was going to do with the house. My mother owned her home outright. She had paid off the mortgage 6 years before she was diagnosed. She also had a modest retirement account, approximately $40,000 in savings, and the contents of a house that she had filled carefully over 60 years. Her estate was not complicated. She had a will that had been drafted by an attorney in 2019, and it divided everything equally between Vic and me. The conversation that followed my mother's death was not the first one I had not been prepared for. It was the fourth. The first was 3 weeks after the funeral, when Vic called to tell me that he had spoken with a financial guy who had explained that the estate taxes on a property in Rincon Valley, combined with the cost of probate, would significantly reduce what either of us would actually receive if we tried to split the house. He said this with the tone of someone sharing reluctant news, a tone I now recognize as a rehearsed thing. He said that the most efficient solution, financially, would be for him to buy out my share directly, without going through probate, which would save us both time and money. He named a figure. It was 38% below the house's assessed value on the county assessor's website, which I knew because I had looked it up the same week my mother passed. I told him I would think about it. The second conversation was 2 weeks after the first. Tara called this time, which was unusual, and she used the word practical 9 times in 20 minutes. She said that she and Vic had already spoken with a real estate attorney. She referred to him as our guy, and he had confirmed that the probate process in Pima County could take up to 18 months and cost thousands of dollars in legal fees. She said that my mother would have wanted things to be simple. She said that she understood I was still grieving, and that was completely normal, but that the window for handling this outside of probate was limited. She mentioned a deadline. The deadline was specific, it had a date attached to it, and it felt like a thing that had been designed to be memorable. That night, I called my friend Rosalie, who is a paralegal at a family law firm in Phoenix. I described the deadline. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That's not a real deadline." She said probate timelines in Arizona are set by the court, not by one beneficiary's preference, and that nothing Vic or Tara or their attorney had described created any legal urgency for me to act outside the normal process. She asked if I had read my mother's will carefully. I said I had. She said to read it again. I did, and then I called the attorney who had drafted it. His name is not important, but his office is on Speedway Boulevard and he had represented my mother since 2011. He confirmed what Rosalie had said. He also told me something that I had not fully processed the first time I read the will. My mother had added a handwritten codicil in 2021 in front of 2 witnesses that had been formally notarized and attached to the original document. The codicil stated that any beneficiary who attempted to pressure, coerce, or deceive the other beneficiary in connection with the distribution of her estate would forfeit their portion entirely, with that portion redirecting to a scholarship fund she had established at the middle school where she had worked. She had never mentioned it to me. I sat with that for a long time. The third conversation happened when Vic drove to the house, my mother's house, where I was still living, managing the estate process, and sat across from me at the same kitchen table where he had asked about the house 4 hours after our mother died. He had a folder. Inside the folder were printouts he described as documentation of the property's deferred maintenance liabilities, a phrase I had not previously heard him use. He pointed to figures. He said the roof was approaching end of life and would need replacement within 2 years, and the HVAC system was aging, and the electrical panel was original to the 1987 construction, and that any realistic assessment of the property's value had to account for these issues. He said their attorney had prepared a fair market offer that reflected the home's true condition. I asked if I could keep the documents to review them. He said of course, and he left them, and after he left I took photographs of every page and texted them to Rosalie. She called me back within 45 minutes. The roof assessment had been prepared by a company I had never heard of. The HVAC topination cited a serial number that did not match the unit installed in the house. I knew this because I had been present for the maintenance service 2 years earlier and I had the invoice in my mother's filing cabinet. The electrical estimate was for a panel configuration that did not describe our house. The figures had been constructed carefully enough to look real at a glance, but fell apart under the kind of attention I had been trained to give things. Rosalie asked what I wanted to do. I told her I wanted to sign. She was quiet for a moment, then I explained what I meant. I am not someone who enjoys confrontation. I want to be clear about that, because the story is easy to read as the story of someone strategic and cool-headed, and I was neither of those things. I was 31 years old, and I had just spent nearly 2 years watching my mother disappear by degrees, and I was exhausted in a way that I did not yet have words for. But I had spent my entire adult life learning to pay attention to details that other people didn't notice. and I had been paying attention for months, and I was not going to sign anything without making sure it meant what I needed it to mean. I bought a small digital recorder at a Walgreens on Oracle Road. I put it in the inside pocket of my cardigan and tested it twice in my car in the parking lot. Then I called Vic and asked if we could all meet, him, Tara, and me, to go over the documents one final time before I made my decision. I said I had some questions about the figures and I wanted to understand them before I signed anything. He agreed immediately. People who believe the outcome is settled tend to be accommodating about process. We met at a restaurant in the foothills area, the kind of place with high ceilings and well-spaced tables and ambient noise that would not interfere with a recording. I arrived first. I ordered water and activated the recorder before they walked in. I asked my questions with what I hope sounded like uncertainty. I asked Vic to confirm that the figures and the maintenance documentation reflected actual assessments from licensed contractors. He said they did. I asked Tara whether the timeline they had described, the deadline she had mentioned on the phone, was something their attorney had provided in writing. She said yes, that their attorney had advised them that acting quickly was essential to avoiding probate complications. I asked Vic directly whether, if I chose to go through the standard probate process instead, I would be assuming significant financial risk. He said yes, absolutely, that their attorney had been very clear that the probate route would cost us both considerably and that I would be making things unnecessarily difficult. He leaned across the table at that point. His voice dropped in the way voices drop when someone wants to make something feel private and serious. He said that he had been patient with me, that he had given me time to grieve, but that I was not the only one who had lost a mother. He said that if I continued to delay, he would have no choice but to pursue his legal rights aggressively, and that he had an attorney who was very good at that kind of thing, and that I should think carefully about whether I wanted to make this harder than it needed to be. Tara added in a quieter voice that she hoped I understood they were trying to be fair with me. I told them I appreciated that. Then I said I was ready to sign. The signing happened 2 days later at the office of their attorney, a man I will call by his title only. He had prepared the documents. I performed uncertainty through the whole thing. I asked small questions. I took my time reading each page. I let my hands be slightly unsteady as I held the pen. Their attorney confirmed, for the record and therefore for the recorder in my cardigan pocket, that the figures in the offer reflected fair market value and that I was entering into the agreement voluntarily and without any external pressure. He said this the way people say things they have said many times before in rooms where they believe everyone already agrees. I signed every page. What they didn't know, what I had not told anyone except Rosalie, was that before I walked into that office, I had already filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate regarding the fabricated maintenance documentation. I had already submitted an audio file to the Pima County Superior Court's electronic filing portal, flagged as evidence in connection with a pending probate matter. I had already sent a copy to my mother's estate attorney on Speedway Boulevard, along with a written summary of every conversation, every voicemail, every text message, every discrepancy between the documentation Vic had provided and the actual records in my mother's filing cabinet. And I had attached a copy of the codicil. I walked out of the attorney's office at 2047 in the afternoon and sat in my car for a few minutes without starting it. The Rincon Mountains were visible from the parking lot, the way they always are in Tucson on a clear afternoon, that specific reddish purple that doesn't look real in photographs. I sat and looked at them for a while. My phone buzzed about 20 minutes later. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. It was their attorney. He left a message that I have since listened to several times, not out of satisfaction exactly, but out of something I don't have a clean word for. His voice had lost the theatrical steadiness he had performed in the signing room. He said there was an issue with the filing. He said he needed to speak with me before anything moved forward. He said the word urgent 3 times. He said that there may have been a misunderstanding about certain details in the process. I did not call him back that day. The court's ruling came down 8 weeks later. The agreement I had signed was voided on the grounds of documented coercive misrepresentation, a finding supported by the audio recording, the fabricated contractor documentation, the discrepancies between the cited serial numbers and actual installed equipment. and the recorded confirmation by their attorney that I had signed without external pressure, which the court found to be a material misstatement made in the presence of evidence to the contrary. Vic's claim to the estate was forfeited under the codicil's terms. The portion of the estate that would have gone to him redirected to the scholarship fund my mother had established, a fund that will send one student from her school to a summer academic program every year for as long as the principal lasts. Their attorney received a referral to the State Bar of Arizona's disciplinary committee. I want to be careful about how I describe what came after, because it would be easy to make this sound cleaner than it was. Vic called me twice in the weeks following the ruling. I did not answer. He sent an email that I read once and did not respond to. I am not interested in reconciliation, which is a sentence I never thought I would say about my own brother, and which still lands strangely when I say it, even to myself. But I have spent enough time in the rooms of people who are dying to know that grief does not automatically produce clarity, and anger does not automatically produce honesty, and the people who were supposed to show up for my mother had 2 years and 11 visits to decide who they were. I did not make that decision for them. I am still living in my mother's house. I had the roof inspected by an actual licensed contractor, one I found myself through the state licensing board's verified directory. It has 7 to 10 years of useful life remaining. The HVAC runs fine. The electrical panel was updated in 2009, a fact that had been documented in the permit records at the county assessor's office the entire time. My mother's watercolor class at the community center holds a session every Thursday. I signed up for it in April. I am not good at it. My instructor, a retired art teacher named, well, she knows who she is, told me gently in the 3rd session that I was gripping the brush too hard and that watercolor requires you to let the water do some of the work. I am trying to learn that. It is harder than it sounds. What I keep coming back to is the codicil. My mother drafted it in 2021, which means she drafted it during the months when I was first adjusting to living with her. First understanding what the next few years would look like. She never told me it existed. I don't know if she was protecting me from having to think about it, or protecting herself from having to say what she feared out loud, or simply doing what she had always done, which was prepare quietly for things she hoped wouldn't happen but suspected might. She was a librarian. She believed in documentation. She believed in having the right record available when someone needed it. She left me the right record. I don't know if she knew what she was giving me when she did it. I think she probably did. I think she knew exactly who would be sitting at that kitchen table 11 days after she was gone, and I think she made sure that the table and the house and everything she had spent her life building would still be there when the conversation was over. There is a version of this story where I don't call Rosalie, where I sign the first offer without asking questions because I am 31 and exhausted and just want it to be over, where I let my brother's certainty replace my own. I think about that version sometimes, not with fear exactly, but with the specific attention you give to a near miss, the kind where you want to keep it visible so you don't make the same mistake about what you almost lost. My mother spent 27 years putting books into the hands of children who needed them. She spent the last 2 years of her life in a house that someone showed up for. I want to believe she knew both of those things, and that they were enough, and that somewhere in the Thursday afternoon light of a watercolor class she would not have gotten to take, she is gripping the brush a little more loosely than I am. I'm working on it. There's an image I keep coming back to, and it's not the one you'd expect. It's not my brother's face when the ruling came down, or the voicemail from their attorney with all the steadiness gone out of his voice. It's my mother at a kitchen table. Not the table where Vic sat 11 days after her funeral asking about the house, but an earlier one, a quieter one, with a legal pad and a pen, writing something she never told me about. She made a decision in 2021 that she chose not to explain to me. She drafted that codicil, had it witnessed, had it notarized, and then she filed it away and said nothing. For a long time, I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me wished she had told me. Part of me understood that she was protecting something. Not just the estate, but me, from having to know what she feared her own son might do. What I've come to believe is that she trusted me to figure it out. Not because I was strategic or calculating, but because she had watched me for 31 years, and she knew that I pay attention. She knew that I don't let things go unexamined. She knew that the same instinct that made me update medication logs before my first cup of coffee in the morning would eventually turn toward a folder of suspicious documents and ask the right questions. There is a cause and an effect to almost everything that happened in this story. Vic and Tara made a series of choices to stay away, to not contribute, to let me carry everything. And those choices didn't exist in a vacuum. They shaped what came after, not because the universe was keeping score, but because choices accumulate. The person who shows up for 2 years learns things, develops instincts, builds the kind of quiet attention that is very hard to manipulate. I think about what it actually takes to do what I did. Not the filing, not the recorder, but the sustained decision to keep showing up when no one was watching and there was no reward for it. That required something I didn't have a word for at the time. I'd call it integrity now, though that word feels a little formal for what it actually felt like, which was mostly just getting up every morning and doing the next necessary thing because it was the right thing and my mother needed it done. It also required me to think clearly under pressure. When Rosalie said, "That's not a real deadline," I had to be willing to hear that, to examine what I'd been told instead of simply accepting it because the person telling me was my brother and I wanted to believe him. Critical thinking is not a comfortable thing. It asks you to look at what is actually in front of you, not what you hoped would be there. And then there is the part that people don't talk about as much, which is simply not giving up. 22 months is a long time. The nights I stayed up tracking medications, the insurance appeals I wrote, the mornings I drove my mother to appointments and sat with her in waiting rooms and drove her home and made lunch and then went back to my own work. None of that felt noble while it was happening. It felt like Tuesday. It felt like Wednesday. It felt like an ordinary life that happened to be very hard. But I kept going, and so did she. My mother is the one who planted everything that grew in this story. She did it quietly, without announcement, without anyone watching. She taught me what she believed by the way she lived, and then she left me one final document to make sure I had what I needed. I'm still learning to hold the brush loosely, but I'm learning,